Welcome, book boys. It is April. It is springtime, and we are back with episode 23. Nicholas, Philip, and Carl. Which Carl, do you ask?
The
Nick,
one
will
with
you
the
answer that
C.
question for us?
The Carl with the C.
The Carl with the C.
Yeah. Not the Carl with the K, unfortunately.
It is Carl Jung and his musical Man and His Thimbles. Oh no, that's different. Man and His Symbols.
So annoying. What the fuck is this? Yes,
You get
man
it,
and
right?
his musical his symbols. But this symbols is the S symbols, not the C symbols.
No, I was saying like thimbles, like the little plates.
Symbols.
Thimble, like a thimble. You know,
Like a
the
thimble of
musical instrument? Yeah.
right, right. I thought you meant the symbol as in like a symbol in like a drum set, for example.
Ah, that's a different.
That
Oh, there
what
we
that
go.
would make much more sense. So I don't know why you went with that. Why you didn't go with that, but it's okay. It's only the podcast introduction, for which people will decide whether they want to listen to the rest of this whole thing for. So the stakes aren't really that high. It's fine.
Okay, shut up. We are, we are geographically separated right now.
Thank
Okay.
God.
I'm in Tokyo. I've ran away to the academy for another 2 years.
Yeah.
Nick is in Sapporo, and he's figuring out his career, something
Yes.
that I have pushed off for the future.
Yeah. So I guess a little bit of news from here. We have some construction in my apartment, and it's incredibly loud. Thankfully, they finished for the day, but most of my day is filled with the sound of drilling in the walls, and I can never quite tell where the drilling is coming from, which makes it even worse. And they've also covered the whole place with scaffolding and put sheets around the whole thing, so I can't even see the outside anymore. I feel kind of like I'm in some strange prison. I can just see kind of glimpses of the outside, and I'm worried about my lack of vitamin D. So, yeah, apologies if I'm forgetful today.
I'm in my new student dorm room at Tokyo U, and it is fucking dark. I need to close my curtains at all times, basically, because I have like the room that's right in front of the road. So if I open the curtains, it's just like people staring at me from the outside, sitting at my desk in my little prison cell.
It's amazing. But you're paying you have quite a cheap dorm by the sounds of it, though, right?
Yeah, I got that like 60, 70 euro rent. So
It's beautiful. That's a
that
month,
is nice.
baby. So anyway, yeah. So this time we are talking about Carl G. Jung's Man and His Symbols. I can't stop thinking of drum symbols now. But so this was the last book published under his name before his death. It was published in 1964, and unlike the rest of his books, it's kind of it's actually a compilation of. Each chapter is written by a different person who is associated with Jung, like his students, I suppose.
His students, yeah. And the first chapter is written by Jung, which makes about almost a third of the book, I would say.
Yeah, it's a large part of the book for sure.
I've actually got the 1964 version borrowed from the Tokyo University Library in front of me. It's very large, but it's filled with a lot of pictures to illustrate, I guess, his ideas. So it's yeah, you can read it in 2 weeks without stressing too hard, I think.
Yeah, and it was nice that there's a lot, because it deals with a lot of imagery, symbols. It includes a lot of like references to art and art history and archaeology and stuff like that as well, which is so it's there's lots of pictures for the people that like pictures.
And maybe we should start by defining the territory here. So when we say symbol in this context, what it mean? So he says a symbol is different from a sign. Do you remember that at the intro?
Yes. I think I have this somewhere. Do you have the
So a
quote?
sign, well, I remember, I think, the gist of it. So I think a sign would be like the logo of a company, for example, right? Something that man consciously creates to represent something else that is known, whereas a symbol cannot be consciously created.
Yeah.
A symbol just kind of appears collectively or, through dreams. That is, the unconscious produces it, and it's...
Yes.
Or no, it's not that the unconscious produces it.
It has like an unconscious aspect to it, or like a shared unconscious like quality to it.
People produce it, but they don't consciously know what it's in reference to, what it exactly symbolizes.
Yeah. That's
something you can interpret and analyze, but at the moment of creating it, like you can't create a symbol, consciously. They just kind of, they appear throughout history, and then they get reinforced over time.
Yeah, and this is kind of a standing kind of assumption of this book, is that these things naturally occur, and that we can, almost as if they have some like objective quality. There's this like these collective symbols which appear in different cultures, and that they are definitely the same thing.
So just
before we get into it, though, I just wanted to just mention about the book as like the book as the thing, like the
right.
The concept behind this book, or like the function of this book, the reason it was made was to an attempt to make Jung's work like more approachable to a wider audience. So this was, and originally it was apparently something that Jung was pretty resistant to, for whatever reason. But he had a dream where he found himself addressing a bunch of ordinary people, he just describes it as a group of people, and he took this dream as like a kind of sign that he should like take this project. So this book is supposed to be much more approachable compared to the rest of his work.
It is approachable, but you can also tell that it's leaving out a lot of like I feel like a lot of the back explanations are not in this book. Like there are a lot of assertions, but the proofs are not really mentioned. So.
That's there are some. We can talk about that as we go through the approachability and like how well it succeeds at that. Because I do have some kind of. I think I do have some issues with it.
I have a lot of issues. Overall, I would say I enjoyed the book. Kind of. I think the subject matter is very interesting.
Yeah.
And the things it allows us to talk about are very interesting. Okay, just first of all, from a writing perspective, I think it was pretty bad. Like
yes, yeah.
I think the structure is catastrophic.
I'm so glad you think that. I thought it was a fucking disaster in some ways.
Yeah, there's a lot of rambling and just like, anecdotes are of course used to illustrate certain ideas, but there's no like logical coherence to the sequence in which we are introduced to a lot of these things.
There's also there's no real explanation for why the chapters are separated in the way that they are. And in some ways as well, what the difference between some of them are. Some of them feel kind of like part of the same conversation, and some of them feel a little bit like, I don't know, distant.
Yeah, so...
also, most of the writing is not fun. I think I found a lot of the writing pretty bad, and generally, like as you said, kind of even in spite of this book supposedly being like for the layman, for someone who has no experience, there's a hell of a lot of just kind of exposition. It's talking about not even exposition, but like just talking about like things that are pretty over the layman's head, I think. I don't know. I got quite frustrated with a few chapters especially the art history one. That one was.
Yeah,
so
I think
annoying.
that was my least favorite
I hate.
chapter as well. I think, but
Yeah. But anyway, yeah.
Okay, so how should we approach this? All right, so that's on the writing part of it. There's a different aspect that I had some questions about, which is there are multiple disciplines, I think, weaved into this book and into Jung's methodology and his life in general, I guess. So there's psychology, that's one thing. Then there's his clinical practice, so that's applied psychology. Then there is like kind of neurobiology-ish kind of stuff, so like talking about brain and the human body and how that interacts with psychology. Then there's the whole like study of ancient texts and ancient stories and ancient symbols and all that. And we should talk about how he weaves those two together. But just to put it out that that's another part. Then there's the art aspect of it. So he talks about art. And then there's kind of a religious aspect to it.
Yeah.
And so we have all these different disciplines that are used to derive this or explain this Jungian method of psychology.
Yeah.
And it's not obvious to me that these shouldn't be separate things. So, for example, I found and this is the same approach we had when we read Genesis. I found this idea of analyzing ancient texts, ancient stories, and trying to figure out why have they persisted, what do they mean, what do they symbolize, right? So that's kind of, topic of this book, what do they symbolize? I found that very interesting as a study in itself. So like just a study of like ancient texts and symbols and how they evolve over time. So that's one thing.
Yeah.
The Jungian step is then to say that a lot of these things aren't created consciously, but they're rather an expression of a common unconscious of humans over many centuries.
The term is the collective unconscious.
Yes. And that when it comes to dream analysis, so that's another aspect of this whole thing, kind of a main aspect actually. When it comes to analyzing dreams, the key thing for a psychologist to do is actually to first study all these ancient texts, right?
Right.
And so that these two are like inseparable isn't super obvious to me. I get it, but I would prefer them as separate studies. And I think there are some aspects of this book which I found generally quite fucking loony.
There was some pretty like incredible claims.
Which is not an uncommon criticism of Jung, I think.
Right.
I think especially, and I'm not a friend of like the orthodox academia view, as you know.
Yeah.
But I think Jungians have had a kind of struggle in academia for a long time because his science was kind of viewed with a lot of skepticism.
Well, just as a kind of I mean, there were some kind of examples given in the book. So most of the book is based around dream interpretation, and it's all like centers around, the power of the unconscious mind and the way that humans kind of, or the way that people can interact with this unconscious part of themselves. Some of the I remember in the first chapter, as one example, he described like this young girl who was the daughter of she was like a 7-year-old girl who was the daughter of one of his friends or something, right?
Yeah.
And she came to him speak, and she made a book for her dad as like a Christmas present, which showed these dreams that she'd had, which were all kind of quite grave, kind of disturbing dreams. And then it turned out, like in a very short time after that, she died from some illness. And Jung uses this as like he kind of uses this as evidence to suggest that, like, you know, a child, because of, I guess partly because of their, like, where they are biologically and the way that your biology informs your unconscious mind, as something that is growing, you should naturally be having these dreams of, like, the dreams that are related to that experience of childhood. But these dreams were actually very unusual because they were about the experience of dying, or they could be compared to that. And so he kind of, you know, he was like, this makes complete sense that this child had these dreams. This is, like, maybe somewhat easy to digest, but then he had this one example where he was, like, speaking to some guy who's, like, he's lives recklessly, I think because he has this, like, quite depraved lifestyle and he doesn't really care about his life or something.
Is this a mountain climber?
Yeah. So he does things like climbs mountains, does very, like, dangerous stuff. And he came to Jung one day and told him about a dream where he was on top of a mountain, I think, and he jumped into a black abyss or something. And Jung was like, "No, stop, don't go." He was like, he like literally told him not to go mountain climbing, and then however many months later, it turned out that he fell off a mountain and died. And it's almost kind of conspiratorial the way that it's presented. Like, it has that kind of quality of, like, this is the shit they're not telling you, bro.
Okay, right. So the way it's explained in the book is that so let's take this concrete case of the mountain climber, right? So Jung would say that the dream the mountain climber saw, where he fell off a mountain and died, or stepped in a black abyss or whatever, that is his unconscious signaling to his conscious side that, you know, he's been reckless recently, and that if he continues on this path, this is how this will inevitably end. But, you know, his conscious side wouldn't acknowledge that, and so in this case where then he actually did fall off the mountain, or jump off, perhaps, who knows, it's not that the dream somehow prophesied this in like a kind of oracle type way, but rather that he had this proclivity to do dangerous things, more dangerous than they should be, and that he simply was consciously ignoring those. And the dream he saw was his unconscious trying to signal to him that, you know, there's like an alarm bell here that you're not acknowledging, right? Yeah. So I can understand that, although the example is a bit, like, extreme. So before we get into some specific parts, I want to try to better articulate my earlier criticism. So if we really summarize it up, then I would say, and this is kind of what I wish it would say explicitly in the book, which it doesn't. But I think the claims presented in this book are thus: first, there is an unconscious. Yes. That we're not, that humans have ignored for a long time, and that especially as civilization has advanced and we have been estranged from kind of like primal or like primitive practices such as like shamanry and, like, you know, pagan rituals or whatever, that we have completely suppressed this unconscious aspect and we're not paying attention to it in modern society. The next claim is that that's not good. Yeah. We should pay attention to the unconscious. And then the next claim is that the correct way to pay attention to the unconscious and to communicate with your unconscious is through dream analysis. The intermediate claim between those two being that the unconscious makes itself graspable, or it presents itself to the conscious through dreams, right? And, you know, that we shouldn't ignore dreams. We should actively try to understand them, and that our life will become better as a result of understanding our unconscious. Yeah. And so that's this whole...
just to add on to that, he kind of... I'll make this very short, but So dream analysis is it's kind of described as one way of our unconscious mind communicating with our conscious mind. So there are situations where our unconscious feeling leads us to conscious thought, as in the example of when you see someone and you come to realize that they're quite suspicious. For example, sometimes you're not consciously looking for something, but those like things come to you.
Right. Or even when you're having an idea, right? Like we say, I came up with this song, I came up with this idea.
Yeah.
Well, did you? Like, your unconscious presented it to you. You don't really know where that came from, right?
Exactly. And he applies this to basically all human behavior, and there's quite a kind of he makes a point to kind of apply this to religious thinking and to rational thinking as well. To say that there's like this underlying hand that we can't see, which nudges us in certain directions. And I definitely, that resonated a lot with me. And it reminded me a lot of, there's this part from an Alan Watts lecture where he talked, and Alan Watts talks a lot about Carl Jung as well, but he talks about like when you decide to move your hand. So you decide, like, I'm going to move your hand, but what's the thing that decide to move the hand? And I think that's maybe also gesturing at this like idea of the unconscious as well. Yeah, anyway, yeah. Continue.
Yeah. So we have this interdisciplinary set of claims. There is an unconscious that's different from the conscious. We've lost touch with it. We shouldn't lose touch with it. It's very important to pay attention to. It presents itself through dreams, and we should analyze those dreams. And then there's another step, which is the correct way to analyze those dreams is through understanding ancient stories and symbols, and to then see how they manifest themselves in dreams, and or how the unconscious plays off these ideas, right?
To correctly interpret them.
The dream, yeah. So the problem is not with any of these steps individually. I think they're all very interesting. But it's not obvious to me at all that this is like the ideal chain of events. Like, to say that there is an unconscious, I think that's not super controversial at this point. And then to say like, okay, we should pay attention to it. Okay, maybe. And then the best way to do that is through dream analysis. Okay, now we've made a big leap, right? And there's not a lot of evidence for that claim. That's just kind of what he does. And because he does it, he says that's like the best way to do it.
Sure. Yeah.
And then the next step that I think is even more troubling perhaps is that also the way to analyze dreams is to understand like ancient stories. So there are a lot of connections here that are not they're not he doesn't explain why understanding ancient stories is the best way to analyze dreams, or he doesn't understand why analyzing dreams is the best way to understand the unconscious, and he doesn't explain why understanding the unconscious is so relevant to improving our life or whatever. Like, he does say that these things are all important and that they're good, and he gives examples, but it's not obvious to me that this is like the way, right?
I think it's maybe hard to appreciate the first claim about like that it's important to understand ancient symbols. I think a lot of the time spent by basically all of the authors in the book is trying to kind of justify these existing symbols in history and trying to show some kind of universality. And it goes from, showing, there's one section I remember about city planning, for example, referring to like the plan of like...
The fucking circle?
Yeah, the idea of circles.
Oh my god, that shit drove me insane.
And so, looking at, for example, the way that ancient Rome was structured versus Paris today, and things like, things like mandalas, which are something that I'm sure some people are familiar with, like this kind of these circles with interlocking lines going through them and triangles and different shapes.
Yeah, I think they're from like Indian Hindu culture.
Yeah. And so there's a lot of time spent trying to kind of draw the comparisons between these things. But it's difficult for me, maybe just purely by virtue of the fact that I've not spent any time really outside of this book thinking and learning about these things, that when you're kind of presented with all this information, all you can really say is like, okay, I guess I trust you. Like, yeah, you're right. Like, there are circles in lots of different cultures, or cultures have stones, like, and they apply some like value to stones. But you kind of have to like think like, is there really this universality that's being, pushed in this book? Like,
yeah, I think another problem I had is that what you just mentioned, basically that certain things are clearly, in my opinion, simply what would you say? Outcomes of inevitable circumstance that are then presented as this like great psychological deduction. So, for example, it talks about. Let me actually pull up this page with the stones. I had like a very specific notation for this. Page 209. This is page 209 in the original book. I don't know about your version.
Let me see.
So, right, okay, let me just read this short paragraph here. Mm-hmm. The urge that we find in practically all civilizations to erect some monuments to famous men or in the site of important events probably stems from this symbolic meaning of the stone. The stone that Jacob placed on the spot where he had his famous dream, or certain stones left by simple people on the tombs of local saints or heroes, show the original nature of the human urge to express an overwise, inexpressible experience by the stone symbol. And then it goes on and it talks about stones before and after that. And basically there's this whole thing about he analyzes, like, we read it in Genesis, right? Jacob places a stone where, like, he had this vision of God, and he calls it Bethel and whatever.
Yeah.
And then it talks about, okay, so there are all these reasons why, or there are all these instances of ancient cultures using stones as gravestones or making monuments out of stone.
Mm-hmm.
And so this somehow shows that there is like a certain quality about stones that humans interpret in a certain way as a symbol for a thing, and that our unconscious, that there's some quality about stones, why our unconscious selects them as representatives for death or something, right? Whereas I think the most obvious explanation in most of these cases is just simply, well, there are actually only so many fucking things on Earth. And so if you wanted to make like a monument or a statue, like, you could have made it out of wood or of clay or out of stone. And if we're digging these things up thousands of years later, the wood and the clay ones, they're not going to be there anymore. Yeah. So yeah, it's only the stone ones that we found.
Yeah, survivorship bias maybe.
Yeah. So I don't know. There's just like a lot of this. Like, I'm not saying that all of his analysis is wrong or anything, but he often makes these very far-reaching analyses about things that seem perfectly explainable by the immediate objective reality, right?
Yeah.
Like, imagine you're like a primitive man in a forest and you want to like make a little altar of stone to remember a certain place, or you want to like mark a certain place, right? So there's only so many things you can do. You can like carve into a tree, or you can put down some stones, or you can maybe like rearrange the dirt.
Yeah. And they probably did all of those things.
Exactly. So I don't know. There are more instances like this where I think we have the same issue.
Yeah. I found that was especially relevant in the 4th chapter by Aniela Jaffe, I guess is the name, Aniela, which was about symbolism in the visual arts. There was a very lengthy discussion about modern art and the place of modern art, and one of the kind of key arguments from that, one of the core arguments from this section was that because in the modern era we have come to a point where we are so disconnected from nature and these kind of this unconscious conscious unity which people of the past had, this is reflected in artwork and can even be directly viewed through certain symbols that appear in the artwork. And some examples, for example, so there was a lengthy discussion about the circle or the square in the circle, which has like some symbolic meaning apparently in different cultures. But the fact that certain artwork was being made where circles were outside of the square and different like abstractions were being made, that this is somehow this is somehow like a demonstration of how fragmented we are today psychologically. And you know, I think it's an interesting thing to think about, and I think there is probably a good discussion to have about that. But at the same time, like the same kind of thing, like we have a certain canon of visual art, and one of the things no one in this book seems to do is to kind of consider what things survive and why they survive. So religious art surviving, how do I say this? The church being like a massive organization, especially in the past, I feel like it's natural that a lot of these artworks would survive because the church, having the monopoly on power, would have the greatest resources to preserve these things. And I don't know if we necessarily know what other kind of art was being produced by the time by, ordinary people who had no like affiliation, whether that was necessarily being done. So there, I think it's like we're both like interested in sociology as well, and structures of like human civilization structures in society, and like what other factors influence what resources we have to view today, especially when it comes to how like what's being produced too.
Yeah, that's another issue that is present at multiple points in the book. It's just that there's a lot of sampling bias. So as you said, like, if we look at these church things that survived, obviously they're, got whatever the most like powerful institutions that collected all the taxes and had all the violence accumulated, and the state, and so like they're gonna survive and so on. No, but just to get back to the fucking circle and that, like they had this whole thing about the meaning of the circle and the mandala, which a circle and a mandala is not the same fucking thing, okay? Like, and then the circle in the square and the circle outside of the square, and it's like there are only like 3 basic shapes: circles, squares, and triangles. Like, sure, I get it. There are pentagons and whatever as well, but like any fucking children's play set, you have those 3: circles, squares, and triangles. They're the basic fucking shapes. And so if you have 2 of those represented in a painting, and then you have 2 of those 3 basic shapes represented in a different painting hundreds of years ago, you're not gonna be like, look, it's the same thing. There are only so many fucking shapes to draw, okay?
And the same thing is with, you can kind of say the same thing with animals as well. The assumption that, like, the lion as a symbol, for example, has some kind of like collective unconscious quality. Like, if you've never seen,
to some extent, but not to another, sure. Right? Yeah.
Yeah, if you've never seen a lion before, can we really say that like you would necessarily understand the symbolic nature of a lion?
Yeah. So I mean, okay, two points in this. First, there are some general things that are so obvious that you don't even have to say them. Lions are big and they're predators and they're strong. So yeah, they're gonna be used as like,
yes,
who's the strongest?
For
the
sure.
king.
For
so
sure.
Yeah, a lion might be a king or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when I went to a lot of museums in France and Germany and Belgium when I was in Europe in February, and this very specific point about the lion fucking drove me insane, because I would go from like, even in the same museum of like different statues, like it's like, here you can see the lion, the symbol, the universal symbol for power in all the cultures, and then you go to the next statue and it's like, here you can see the lion, the universal symbol for benevolence in all the cultures. And then it's like the next one, it's like, here you can see the lion, the universal symbol for the state in all the cultures.
Yeah.
Here you can see the lion, the universal symbol for the duality between God and man. And it's okay. So I love this study of ancient symbols and ancient texts, and like trying to derive some intrinsic qualities out of these things. That I love that shit. But because I'm actually interested in it, I don't like this just like baseless assertion that a lion means this or that, right? Like, again, this is like me, econometrician, autistic brain, but I almost want to make like, I always want to accumulate like a database of all like known representations of lions, and then regress different like variables on it to like statistically show that a lion has been like associated with certain ideas, right? And like honestly, that is the only way you can actually make a general claim like that.
Yeah.
Like, sure, you can say in this culture or in this like specific place and time, and a lion meant this or that. Okay, that's fine. But if you want to make like a general claim, like a lion intrinsically means this, then I'm sorry, if you're not making a like data-based case, you're not making a case at all.
I can see where you're coming from. Like a very methodical approach to within that you can kind of try to, I mean, even then you would still only have a best kind of guess, because you could never account for what doesn't exist.
Exactly. We'd always have to deal with the fact that the data set is biased because only certain things survive and certain things don't survive over time and all that. That's fine. But
you can acknowledge
that would be better than just bringing up like 2 examples over like the entire human history of being like, look, in this case a lion meant sexy, and in this case a lion meant sexy, so therefore lions are pretty sexy. All humans think lions are sexy.
That's maybe the truest thing you've said so far.
And to Jung's credit, when talking about dream analysis, he does specifically say that it's actually really hard to make these generalizations, and that when analyzing someone's dream, you always have to apply specific knowledge of the person, and every person's symbols are going to be different, although there are some universal tendencies, right?
Right.
So I think that I like that about his method.
This was something that I found really interesting when he was talking in the first chapter about dream analysis. Was he was talking about someone? I think this was his chapter. He was talking about someone who was dreaming about like a woman. It was a man who saw a woman in their dream, and I think it was a person that they knew. And this was an interesting case, I think, because the dreamer believed that the person that he saw was like, representative of that person, but what Jung was trying to suggest was that it wasn't a representative of that person, but it was rather representative of the dreamer, manifestation. And so, like, I think he was trying to demonstrate how you can, these pitfalls in your interpretation of dreams. But, you know, in counter to that, what I found frustrating about this whole idea of dream analysis is there was no real rule book. Maybe rule book is the wrong word, but there was no real way of, like, knowing whether you have a right interpretation or not. And
right. So okay,
I can definitely appreciate that. Like, there's, you know, one of the ways that they kind of sort of combat this is by looking at things over a long period of time, and you know, attentively thinking about them. And I think that's, you know, maybe the best thing that you can do. But at the same time, I didn't feel like this book, even though it was made for supposedly the layman, I don't feel like it gave. I have not come away from this read feeling like I have necessarily the tools to think about my own dreams and to, like, have confidence in my interpretation of them.
Right. Yeah, it's not a manual for dream analysis, and he kind of, and this is very convenient, of course, as figuring as well. But he kind of says that there can be no universal rule book because symbols always mean different things based on the individual. And so you can't generalize dream analysis, and B, you need a lot of experience, and experience is the only way to really know this.
If this was,
puts him in a kind of elite position. Like, I'm right, and you. Yeah.
If this was published today in, like, an ebook, there would be a link to his Patreon at the end where you can sign up and have, like, an hour session with him every month where he tells you about his dreams.
Right.
Where you tell him about your dreams.
And I think, you know, it can be true. It can both be true that that's convenient for him, but it's also actually true.
Yeah,
and
sure.
I think that probably is the case. But on your point that there's, like, no kind of real method of verification of the truth of the analysis. So obviously, it would be ridiculous to say that if you dream about a snake, this means that and this is kind of like if you read, like, girls' magazines or cosmology, that's kind of how they work, right? If you dream of a snake, this means that you're going to have a bad day. You know?
Right.
Like, you can't say that because it's going to be specific to you personally.
Yes, sure.
However, I think there should still be some kind of pressure to develop a method of verifying dream analysis. So, for example, you could say, if you see this kind of thing in a dream, or, you know, you have a dream that stresses you out, and then you analyze it, and then, you know, the claim is that if you consciously accept, or if you consciously understand this, what the unconscious is trying to tell you, that there's going to be some kind of actual real outcome in the real world, right?
Right.
So that you would then have to generalize, I think, some kind of method to say, if your analysis was correct, then your following dreams would have a tendency to show this kind of pattern, right?
Yeah.
And we saw this a bit with Henry in the, like, last chapter, where his, like, dreams changed, and Jung was like, okay, so that's just showing.
Just to give a background, the final chapter is a kind of case study, or it's a description of one person's experience. This is Yolanda Jacobi. It's an individual analysis of one of their patients. So the whole chapter is dedicated to the experience of treating this patient.
This guy is named Henry, and the patient is
the dreamer. Yeah,
and there are multiple points. The Yolanda, whatever his name is, the guy who wrote it, the chapter, he's like, okay, so now we're seeing this tendency in his dreams. So that means the treatment, like him coming to get his dreams interpreted, and, like, the sessions we're having are having an effect, and then he's moving in the right direction. I think that's good. Now what we need to do is we need to kind of generalize a methodological way to verify whether your analysis is correct or not, right? So to say, like, if you're having dreams where you're being killed or where you're stressed as fuck, and then we analyze the dream, we incorporate this part of the unconscious into the conscious. Then in your next couple of dreams, you should maybe see these kind of dreams, to have like some kind of way to know that you're moving in the right direction. And I think you can generalize that. Like, I get why you can generalize, like, if you see a black star in your dream, it means you're going to die. Yeah, that's silly. But if there's no way to verify whether the dream analysis is correct, then it just ends up with you are just like a layman who doesn't know shit, and you're just going to have to do whatever the therapist tells you. which is very convenient for the therapist and not very useful for the patient.
Yeah, sure. I was also wondering with the case of Henry, we don't know too much about him, but there are a few clues that kind of raise questions for me. Henry is described as he's like in his early adulthood. He's becoming a man. I think he's becoming an adult. So he's going into this new chapter of his life, and he is engaged to someone, but he's also kind of on the fence. He's feeling kind of a fear of commitment, but he's also described as being like very passionate, interested in literature, very well read, and there is even a clue that he read at least one of Carl Jung's essays. I'm sure he must have read lots more, to be honest. Get the impression that he was kind of quite interested in like Jung's literature.
Yeah.
And I do wonder to what extent there's kind of like a feedback loop, maybe, when you start kind of buying into this idea of dream analysis and you start having certain kinds of dreams.
And that is why in the very first chapter I had this issue with the sampling bias again.
Yeah.
Like, Jung said he interpreted like 80,000 dreams or whatever.
Yeah, and that's crazy.
That is crazy, and it's a bit sus. But
yeah,
because that would mean if he worked 350 days a year, let's say, so if he takes almost no vacations, and he does like a dream a day or so, how long would it take him? No, 280 years, something like that.
Yeah, no, that's a lot of years.
So, but anyway, the sampling bias thing, right? So, all the patients mentioned in this as examples in this book, and maybe he went to like asylums and had like crazy like lower class people as well as his patients. But all the patients that I think are like voluntarily come into his practice are kind of wealthy, right?
Yes.
Like if you're having bad dreams and you're going to see Dr. Carl Jung, especially in that fucking time where people were on average poor as fuck, like, okay, you're a certain kind of person, right? So you're at least like middle class, at least.
Yeah.
You're also actually interested in this shit. Yeah. You already bought in. You wouldn't be there otherwise. And you probably have a tendency for like depression, or in modern psychoanalytics you would say people who are high in neuroticism, so high in receptiveness to negative emotion.
Yes.
So now we're doing this whole dream analysis thing empirically and saying this is the way it works, blah blah blah. Okay, but that's all based on this like seems like on a very specifically biased sample of people. To then say that a modern man needs to look into his unconscious, like, it's not obvious to me at all that like all people should analyze their dreams or something. That this is like a thing necessary for us to understand ourselves better. Maybe it's just for depressed people who also believe in this kind of thing. Like,
Sure. I think it's I don't know if the book necessarily makes the claim that you should analyze your dreams. It definitely tries to make a case, for sure. But I don't.
Near the end.
Go on.
Sorry, go on. near the end of the first chapter that's actually written by Jung, he shits a lot on the modern man, and it's I found it written quite kind of condescendingly, like I know what's going on, but people are blind, kind of that kind of phrasing, and it was a lot like, we're ignoring the like ancient pagan practices and like our interaction with the unconscious, and so modern man is heading towards a catastrophe of like this dissonance with the unconscious, and like like we have to embrace Jen. And there's a very specific part I want to read to you on that. And while I look for it, finish your point. Sorry.
What was my point? I think. I mean, my main point was. I mean, my main point was that. I think, like you said earlier, we can derive utility probably from this practice, but. Yeah, I don't think it would be necessarily like a something that we should necessarily like prescribe to people, or that even we could even try to prescribe to people.
Yeah, it's very generalized. Okay, so on that, this is page 101. I'm quoting. I know what the Buddhists would say. Things would go right if people would only follow the noble eightfold path of the Dharma and had true insight into the self. The Christians tell us that only if people had faith in God, we should have a better world. The rationalists insist that if people were intelligent and reasonable, all our problems would be manageable. The trouble is that none of them manages to solve these problems himself, right? And this is a very interesting critique to say that, okay, whatever ideology you're following, your ideology isn't actually that great, because if it were, you wouldn't have to like be like, all people should do this more. They would already be doing it. Okay, fair enough. Then he goes on in the most like fucking unself-aware manner ever to be like, also, by the way, if only all these fucking stupid people would pay attention to their unconscious, most of our problems would be solved. That's literally what he goes on to say. That's like the next 2 pages are kind of written on that. So it's like, okay, like do you realize what you're saying, dude? Like,
what do you mean?
So he's saying Christians, Buddhists, rationalists,
yeah,
they're silly in a way because they say, if only everyone would adhere to my ideology, or if everyone would solve problems the way I think we should solve our problems, the problems would be solved. And then Jung is like, yeah, but if that was true, then, you wouldn't have to impose it. Then they would already, people would adopt those things naturally. And then he goes on to say, by the way, if only people would pay attention to their unconscious and get in touch with their dreams, most of our problems would be solved, guys. Just saying. It's like, you're literally doing the same thing, dude.
Right. Yeah, it's condescending, I guess. I don't know though necessarily. So I do think that, and I like the way that Jung connects with Alan Watts, and because a lot of what Alan Watts talks about is kind of like, there was a section in the beginning where he talks about, it was just a small quote, I don't have it to hand, but talks about kind of like reconnecting with the things that we forget from when we were children. And I think this is something that is very relevant to a lot of people, and relevant to basically everyone who is like growing and going through some kind of like spiritual or psychological change. That when these changes happen, we kind of lose sight of and literally forget things from our past and forget things that were once valuable or meant something to us. And one thing that Alan Watts, like his question is like, what did you forget? And I do think there is a lot of kind of anguish that comes from I see where he is coming from when he talks about individually growing up as a person, and having to make certain sacrifices in your life, having to make decisions, having to grow in certain directions, having to losing friendships or relationships changing in ways that you don't anticipate, your environment changing in ways, having to deal with disappointment or failure and things like that, and the ways that people try to cope with those. And in a lot of the cases, people kind of trying to repress these feelings and reorientate their values so that they don't regret things, but that actually being the case, being like a something that they end up kind of repressing in themselves. And I mean, I can't say for everyone that like your dreams are the means for you to reconnect with these things, but I would say from personal experience, what I found that really resonated with me. And some of the things that were described in the book were kind of like.
Can you make a personal example?
Yeah. I can probably give a few. Some things felt kind of weirdly on the nose. I think one example that was given was like dreaming about having your dreams change your opinion of people. And I've experienced that a few times, where I have a dream about someone and I wake up and I literally feel different.
Covered in cum.
That too. No, but I've had a few dreams where I've actually like developed empathy for other people, or I kind of seriously.
Is there anything you can say without being like too specific about people you know?
I'm not going to say who it is, but people who I have either like come to quite strongly dislike and have kind of kind of lost the ability to tolerate, and then having dreams where I'm actually on very good terms with them, and then waking up and I guess kind of like I was talking to my girlfriend about this last night, and I think my conclusion was that that it maybe was like a conscious effort on my side to dislike someone and to not consider the totality of them, and maybe those kinds of dreams are a means for you. In this context of like, what do you forget? Would the thing that you forget is like the ability to be compassionate or to even just generally fair to a person that you don't know that well, and I just remember these dreams where it's like very vividly thinking like, oh shit, this is actually a human being, and there are many parts of them that I don't know.
I think a lot of the examples in the book are in that direction, but also it's that you're projecting some kind of negative aspect on yourself, on the person, and you don't want to admit to yourself that you have that negative aspect, so you externalize all that hate in that person. When it's not actually them, you just like it's some negative quality that you share that they also exhibit.
Yeah, that was part of it for sure. I don't know if I could say that's necessarily what was happening in my case, but the way that I interpreted it was more that it was like there was if I were to like attempt some kind of analysis of it, I would say maybe that it's I'm making a conscious effort to dislike someone or to have my opinion of someone, whereas in reality I actually have an unconscious ability or propensity to not think in the way of like, this person is bad, therefore I dislike them, right? And having woken up from a dream like that, and seeing someone in a different way was a way of kind of reminding myself that, you know, I guess that sort of that way of thinking about people is not necessarily, maybe it's not necessarily helpful, or it's it's
okay.
You see what I'm saying?
I've never had that kind of realization through a dream, but I've definitely had the opposite, where I was I always had like an unconscious, like something bothering me about a person, or like signaling to me that I shouldn't, like, it's maybe not best for me to have them in my circle or whatever.
Yeah.
But consciously always trying to be like, trying to ignore that. And then coming to the realization that, you know, I'm consciously trying to like befriend this person or like be on good terms with this person when our difference in values is so fundamental that it's actually a contradiction in my person.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I've had experiences like that as well. So I think from that perspective, like there is some real, like, I feel like there is definitely some power to dreams, but I would not say that it's something that everyone has. I would definitely not say it's something that everyone experiences, and I would definitely not say that it's like a like reliable way of solving your problems. I mean, my girlfriend, for example, she basically never dreams, which I thought was kind of funny. Like, what does that mean in the from the Jungian perspective? If you don't dream, is this because your unconscious is so like
she's a perfect being?
Yeah, is it you are a perfect being who has no unconscious repression, or is it the fact that, you know, the society that you've grown up in has pushed you so far away from your unconscious feeling that that your dreams can no longer communicate with you?
Well, I think what they've shown in like brain scans is that people always dream when they sleep. It's just that many people don't remember them. So there aren't any people who don't dream. It's just that they don't remember.
Sure.
I guess the same question applies, right? Like, exactly, why do you not remember?
Insofar as your dream as a dialogue with you, with your conscious mind.
Yeah. It could also be the opposite, right? Not to like try to throw shade or anything, but it could also be that you're trying to repress the unconscious so hard that you're just completely like it's like the unconscious is so out of sync with your conscious that it's repressing itself, and that's why you don't remember.
Well, yeah, no, that's my point. Like, I feel like that would maybe be the Jungian explanation.
Maybe, yeah. Okay, I want to talk, unless you have something to add on this point.
No, go ahead.
I want to talk about the anima, the animus specifically eventually, because I think this is a very good part of the book. But before we get to that, there are just some other little things I need to shit on before I can move on. So just like rapid fire through this. Okay, there are 2 sections in the book, and this is not even really related to his like Jung's method, but also on page 101 he is talking about overpopulation, how this is like a fact of life. Yeah. And then on page 224 he says that if man can't self-actualize, it doesn't matter if he lives in capitalism or communism. You know, if he's never gonna be in touch with his unconscious, if he's never self-actualizing, it doesn't matter in what kind of system he lives in. It's just going to be shit anyway. And I think those 2 statements are so profoundly ignorant that they've really made me hate him as a person. First of all, the whole overpopulation thing is so evil. I think it's so evil. And to like casually throw out like first of all, this like whole self-actualizing through being in touch with your unconscious. It's not something that most people give a shit about anyway. And so I think it's cool that you're studying it, but it really fucking matters a lot if you're living in capitalism or communism. Basically, for half of the people, it means that they're not going to be living at all if they live in the latter. And to be like, if you don't really get my theory, and if you don't do this like self-actualizing stuff, and if you don't apply yourself in your unconscious and whatever, then silly things like politics and economics, they don't even matter if you can't even do that. And it's like, you got the order wrong, definitely.
You think so?
It's like, it really fucking matters whether you have food and shelter or not. And then if you have some spare time, maybe it's also useful to try and get in touch with your unconscious. But I think that statement was just fucking outrageous.
Definitely. Yeah, it would be difficult to say that, like, you need to become a whole person before you can find your dinner.
Right. It's like, it sounds plausible on a page like this, but like, you wouldn't go to people in a concentration camp and be like, well, you're not even self-actualized, and like, even if you got out of here and even if you had food, like, you wouldn't self-actualize anyway, so yeah, it doesn't even make a difference to like, you want out, you want a house and wife and kids, and you want to see your kids grow up and have grandchildren. Yeah, that's sure, but if you're not even going to understand your unconscious, it's not really a thing you should be worried about anyway. So,
I don't know. I agree with you. It's very difficult. Again, it's the same thing with
it's not a big part of the book, but I just thought that these two statements were just so out of line.
But it is kind of a central part of. Like, it seems to be kind of a central thing that a lot of his followers think about. Like, it was referenced like throughout the book, and there's a pretty reasonable like mention of it in the last chapter, especially, and I mean, this reminds me of like the Zen Buddha's thing as well, which is
right.
There's exactly the same kind of philosophy, I think, where it's like you. But it kind of reminds me of just faith generally. Like, when shit's really hitting the fan, like, you have to tackle what's right in front of you first.
Let me just give the specific quote so I'm not misrepresenting.
Well, there's also there are examples as well of, like, Zen priests who get on a plane and the plane ends up like crash landing, and they freak the fuck out and they're like, oh shit, I'm gonna die, fuck. And then at the end of it, they're like, oh, I wasn't spiritual enough, I need to go back to the temple for another and start at the beginning.
Yeah. That's funny. No, I get what you're pointing at. Okay, so he didn't say self-actualize. He puts it a bit more diplomatic. So it says, to what end does one liberate one's country if afterward there is no meaningful goal of life, no goal for which it is worthwhile to be free? If man no longer finds any meaning in his life, it makes no difference whether he wastes away under a communist or a capitalist regime. Okay, yeah, meaning in life is important. You got to find your own meaning. But like, how? This just feels like so disconnected from reality. Like, it actually makes a very big difference whether you waste away in a communist or a capitalist regime. Like, you're either bored in your fucking New York apartment, and maybe the only thing you do is watch anime and like get drunk with your friends every now and then, have nice meals, or you fucking like are put in a gulag and actually like tortured to shit, and you're in this fucking terrible society where no one has any food and you're terrified all the time and you can talk to no one. I don't know. And so reading this book, I understood a lot of like aspects about, I guess, Jordan Peterson as well. Like he's always drawing on Jungian stuff.
Yeah.
But Peterson is very specific about like this totalitarian state, and he's like a lot of his study is also about the like how shitty communism is and like how bad the totalitarian state is. And like in Jung, there's almost like I don't know. He's so wrapped up in his like psychology dream analysis bubble that he's like, yeah, politics doesn't matter, ideology doesn't matter if you're Christian or Buddhist or rationalist or communist or Nazi.
Yeah.
You got to really figure out yourself first. I don't know. I think there is a very big break between those two viewpoints. And I think the second one is very unreasonable.
Yeah, sure. You often get these kinds of I would say, to be honest, that I take your point. I do think this is present in almost all kind of academic writing.
Yeah.
Where, I mean, everyone is trying to argue for their certain viewpoint or for what is important. And there's no limit to what someone can find important or essential for life. And, you know, speaking about like alienation or like this stuff that Jung talks about, he fits into this broader conversation about what is the what things should we be concentrating on to kind of remedy, especially like psychological situation today. You know, whereas Marx would be concerned with like the division of labor or like the relationship between people in society and seeing that as the source of social ill.
Right.
Everyone is arguing for these
everyone thinks
right?
the thing that they spend their life on is the most important thing.
Yeah.
Otherwise they wouldn't do what they're doing probably. But I mean, yeah, this just seems like if you actually look at like the empirical reality of it, it's like, you know, taking him by his own word of like when he said that about Christianity, Buddhism, and rationalism, when he said that, you know, it's unreasonable to say that other people should follow this ideology or follow this way of life, because if it was so good, it would already be, you know, fixing it or establishing itself, basically. It's like, okay, let's look at the reality that most people for like ever have not analyzed their dreams and have not tried to sync with their unconscious. And, you know, people are doing fairly fine. It doesn't seem like people who are doing that and people who are not doing that have like a hugely different life experience, right? Whereas if you live in a shelter and are chained to a fence, or you live in a New York high-rise, there's a very obvious difference.
But it's also impossible to make that claim when you consider like the sampling bias in all of the work. You know, it's like it's very typical. It's very like convenient that you know, having psychological issues or discomfort when you are in a position to give those time to go through. It's very convenient that like your whole worldview would be arranged around that when that's kind of all that you see.
Yeah. Again, I didn't mean to get so stuck on this. And
no, but yeah, I would just say as a closing point that I still do think that there is something. I do feel like there is something worth. What I liked about it is that he did take this kind of like idea of, I guess, ancient culture or some kind of reconnecting with stories that have value or ideas or symbols that have value, and using and trying to incorporate them into your modern life as a means of some kind of spiritual like ease or growth or whatever. But yeah, it's the kind of plague of basically all. Well, not the plague. It's a given in a lot of this kind of writing, I think.
Yeah, I mean, okay, if he had, for example, said, if you're depressed, it doesn't matter if you earn $1 million a month or $100 a month, you're still going to have a shitty time.
Yeah.
And most people would agree with that, and I probably would agree with that. But the way he phrased it was just a bit like, okay, dude. Anyway.
Also, just to close that, I think, the legacy of Jung does not seem to have really lasted in. I don't know if he was ever really like taken super seriously during his time, but he's definitely had a lot of influence. But I think psychology today is much more focused around material and your environment, and I think that's a much more kind of. If you think about what is most generally practicable, like most widely practicable, if you have like 100 people come to your practice, and most of them either don't have a job, or they have terrible relationships, or they live in poverty, those are like the immediate things that you can do to try and improve someone's situation. And I think for a lot of people that kind of does work, at least to some extent. And yeah, the way that those, the way that your like material circumstances affect your, I guess, mental health is taken quite seriously today, I think.
I would say so, but I would also, in the same breath, say that if you're actually looking at the year 2024, and we're looking at clinical psychology and therapy, and and you could say that, okay, maybe the Jungian kind of method isn't practiced as much. I would also say that clinical psychology in 2024 is definitely on average more of a minus than a benefit to society. I think that point is very, very difficult to argue at this point. There is a huge medicalization, and your kid has ADHD, just put him on a bunch of tablets. In many countries, we now have this whole gender thing where it's required by law that you affirm someone's self-proclaimed identity, and cases where like very severe cases where children are getting surgery and hormones is rare, but it's not obvious to me that modern psychology is actually contributing to well-being of humans. So the fact that Jungian practice isn't as represented, probably that means that Jung had something right. He was doing something right. If they're not doing it today, then it probably means it's something right.
I think on average most the typical experience of visiting a psychologist, whilst it might obviously like the medication thing is a very kind of disturbing tendency. But I mean, I have I guess this is anecdotal, but like my kind of understanding of just the experience of psychology for general people who don't have a what's the word, diagnosable, in the DSA. Is it the DSA? No, not the DSA. the American Psychology Handbook. Like a specific diagnosable illness would be given much more practical advice on how to live life, before things like medical interventions are considered necessary. But this also definitely depends on what country you're living in as well.
I'm very skeptical of the reality of that in the West today on average. I again, anecdotal, but I certainly know of cases where a kid was just a bit awkward in school, sent them to a psychologist. Now their whole identity is predicated on the fact that they're so different, they're so awkward that they need to go to an institution, right?
Right.
So, this is, I think, in a way that treatment itself can be very harmful, because if most kids, they're awkward, they grow up, whatever, they find their way. Maybe they're still awkward, okay. But, if from a young age, you're you have to go to a psychologist, you have to take these meds. Even if you're not taking meds, you have to see a professional. This is now the primary identity marker for this kid to be okay, I'm actually fucked up. And, whenever, this person I'm thinking of, after that had been going on for a year or two, that was they would definitely self-identify I'm the fucked up one, haha.
Right.
And then they didn't graduate school. We're still in an institution. I talked to them 2 years ago.
Right.
And none of my other friends have ever heard of them since. You just disappear somewhere into the system once you're put into the system. So I think it's always hard to tell in absence of the counterfactual, but I genuinely think that if most people who are sent to psychologists today just wouldn't go, would just figure it out by themselves, probably a lot better for them.
Well, I think there's definitely a big distinction when it comes to children and adults as well. I think.
Okay. Yeah.
But anyway, we're getting off track here.
Okay, we're getting very off. Yes, I have some more. I have two more things to shit on, and then I want to talk about good stuff.
Okay.
Page 165. This is the subheading: the first approach of the unconscious. Can you look for that?
No, I won't be able to look from my thing. Wait,
okay, I'll have to
actually, I can try and search it. It'll just take some time. What was it called?
The first approach of the unconscious.
Okay. Approach, not approach.
Look it up, Jamie.
Okay.
We've done that joke before.
Probably, yeah. The first approach of the unconscious. For most people, the years of youth are characterized by a state of gradual awakening in which the individual slowly becomes aware of the world and of himself. Childhood is a period of great emotional intensity, and a child's earliest dreams often manifest in symbolic form, the basic structure of the psyche, indicating how it will later shape the destiny of the individual concerned. For example, Jung once told a group of students about a young woman who was so haunted by anxiety that she committed suicide at the age of 26. As a small child, she had dreamed that Jack Frost had entered her room while she was lying in bed and pinched her on the stomach. She woke up and discovered that she had pinched herself with her own hand. The dream did not frighten her. She merely remembered that she had had such a dream. But the fact that she did not react emotionally to her strange encounter with the demon of the cold, of congealed life, did not augur well for the future and was itself abnormal. It was with a cold, unfeeling hand that she later put an end to her life. From this single dream, it is possible to deduce the tragic fate of the dreamer, which was anticipated by her psyche in childhood.
Okay. So
low-hanging fruit.
So, Jung.
I will say as well. He says in the next paragraph he mentions the word prophecy. Sometimes it is not a dream, but some very impressive and forgettable real event that like a prophecy, anticipates the future in symbolic form. Anyway, sorry, go on.
Okay, so he has like made this case for analyzing dreams, understanding ancient symbols, and like also that different to Freud is about free association, and that whatever you see in a dream is actually a cryptic representation of something else. Jung says, no, the thing in the dream, the specific object or the specific quality that you see in a dream, should be interpreted as is. It's not some like cryptic thing that stands for something else usually.
Right.
So then to say that like this poor girl who killed herself, okay, she was plagued by anxiety as a child, or her whole life, and then she killed herself. Okay, fair enough. To then be like, and also this one time as a child, she saw a dream about Jack Frost, and then she killed herself with her cold hand.
Yeah.
That is so fucking ridiculous, and it just feels very disrespectful.
Yes.
And look how my theory, look the thing I said about, like she once dreamed about a cold thing, and she pinched herself. She didn't even die in the dream. She fucking pinched herself.
Yeah.
She dreamed about Jack Frost, and then she killed herself. You could say she killed herself with a cold hand. Ooh, spoopy.
Mic drop.
That I fucking gasped when I read that. Like,
yeah.
Okay, well, just I don't know. So yeah, a lot of that kind of shit. I think where, just a bit like, calm down, buddy.
Sure. Yeah. Sure.
Okay, one more thing, and then we can talk about the anima. This is page 193, and this is about the woman who dreams about burglars coming into her house. So I'm just gonna read the dream. Two veiled figures climb onto the balcony and into the house. They are swathed in black hooded coats, and they seem to want to torment me and my sister. She hides under the bed, but they pull her out with a broom and torture her. Then it is my turn. The leader of the two pushes me against the wall, making magical gestures before my face. In the meantime, his helper makes a sketch on the wall, and when I see it, I say, in order to seem friendly, "Oh, but this is well drawn." Now suddenly my tormentor has the noble head of an artist, and he says proudly, "Yes, indeed," and begins to clean his spectacles. And then Jung goes to talk about how this dream basically means that her sister, who actually died when she was young, was an artist. And so this dream is her unconscious telling her that actually maybe she should also pursue art. If you were interested in art, maybe that's something you should look into. So this scary thing the burglar got, he turned into something harmless when she acknowledged that the drawing is good, right? It's like, okay, so maybe you should become an artist. And then, after they had this discussion, she actually did become an artist, which is fair enough. And, I'm not going to talk about this specific person, but it just seems a bit like you're very fucking sure of your whole theory to be like my dream analysis is so good that you should overturn your whole life and take a different career. Or there's other people that depending on the dream analysis, they got married or they had children, and it's again this setting aside the physical reality, capitalism, communism, whatever, and just over specifying on this dream analysis stuff. It's but maybe there are also more realistic things that you should think about when you make a real life decision like that. And then also it's maybe useful to think about your unconscious, right?
Yeah, sure.
Completely irrelevant to this woman. Most artists, okay, how do I say this? What if she's just a shit painter? What if she's just a really fucking bad painter? She could still have seen this dream And like Jung would be like, "Oh, you should become a painter," and then she would become a painter, and she was like, "Oh no, this wasn't the right decision."
Right.
So it's like, I don't know, like to put that much into the unconscious and be like, it's telling you you should become a painter, and like this dream only revealed itself because it knows that if you pursue this path, it will be good for you. Like, no, you don't know. You don't know if it will be fucking good for you. You don't know that.
Yeah. And also, I mean, that's not even to mention the fact that, like, who reading this dream, aside from this person analyzing it, would come to the conclusion that, oh yes, this means that you should become an artist.
Right.
You, like, just talking about the content of the dream in itself. Yeah, good point.
And on that note, to make a slightly broader point, okay, so when people were still strictly religious, at least in the Christian context, they would set aside a day a week, an hour a week, to go to church on Sunday and to think about good and evil, and to think about whether they were a good Christian, to think about how they can become a better person to themselves, to their community, in their relationship with God, or if you don't believe in God, in their relationship to some higher moral goal that they have, right? And so the utilitarian thing mentioned often by people like Sam Harris or so would be to say that maybe it's actually good to set some time, like set aside an hour once a week to think about this, like regardless of whether there is a God or not.
Yeah.
Maybe thinking about how to improve yourself and your community and think about morality once a week. That's probably a good thing, and that probably has real life consequences that actually improve the community, even if God doesn't exist, right? So there's some aspect of, like, you know, Christians would say, on average, Christian, and this I think is definitely true in the United States, if you look at Christian families, whereas non-Christian families, on average, they have, you know, higher reports of happiness, they have often, like, more children, better incomes, less suicide, less depression, all that, right? And so then you could say, okay, so Christianity actually is good. Maybe there is a sampling problem here where it's simply that less so than Christianity itself, maybe it's just good to think about your community and morality once a week. Maybe all the good that these people are experiencing simply comes down from reflecting once a week and thinking about these issues, right? Rather than the specifics of Christianity itself. The same applies, I think, to therapy, and especially this kind of dream stuff where it gets a bit loony sometimes, where it's like, maybe to simply talk to someone once a week about what troubles you. Because clearly this woman in this example, for example, like, she talked about maybe being interested in art and her sister dying and all that. That's all something Jung knows, right? So maybe it's just a good thing to once a week go to someone, talk about your problems, talk about what you're worried about, and think about what you could do about it. To then also have this dream analysis aspect, and to say that all the positive experiences these people have is because they got in touch with their unconscious, or is because, you know, we've understood the dream correctly. How do you know that all the positive results you're seeing in therapy isn't actually 100% simply due to these people sitting down and reflecting on themselves?
Yeah.
And I think that is so fucking likely that it's almost like 100%.
Yeah, and I guess this is kind of tangential, but to add on to the point of as you talk about Christianity, like the idea of like reflecting on your religion and your morals and stuff through something like going to church, you can imagine that having a positive effect, but also as well just a doctrine that you live by, and the certain social expectations of your community. Those aspects are also, I think, probably quite a strong influence on your outcomes as well. And yeah, and I mean with psychology as well, like going to a psychologist in itself is an indication that you are desiring to get better in some way.
Exactly.
And I think this is demonstrated quite well when we talk about Henry, who, as we know, is a Jung fan, goes to see Yolande, and after his first session with her, has this like crazy symbol-rich dream, which sounds like it could have come out of Jung's playbook if he'd ever written like a thesaurus, like a book on typical dream symbols.
Yeah.
That you kind of have to think, like, especially with this kind of psychology, it's kind of insidious in a way, because we talk about the unconscious as this unreachable part of ourselves that we can't really control, and we have no true, like, maybe don't have a means of, like, we can't receive the images that we want from our unconscious, I think, is one of the main kind of one of the groundstones of this whole philosophy. But if it's the case that just by seeing a Jungian psychologist that you start dreaming about circles and squares and, like men that turn into women, or prostitutes that turn into priests, or like, all these different symbolically rich like things.
Yeah, my dreams are not like that.
Well, that's another thing that I thought was kind of interesting, is like, there is a caveat in this book where he says that the way that these symbols appear to us aren't static. Obviously, they have some kind of individual a symbol, whilst being a kind of universal, having a universal quality, appear to us in a way that's individual to us, so that if you see a lion in your dream, that doesn't mean that you desire power, or it might not mean anything to do with that. So from that, it always has to have something that's like, always has to be connected to you, and your interpretation of that thing as a symbol. But yeah, it's in the case, we have no way of really telling whether or not we have an influence over our dreams in more of a way than we actually realize. At least there's no like admission of that in this book.
Yeah, and to formalize, I guess, my earlier point and make it a bit more clear, this is like the technical problem, I'd say, in modern economics, which you call omitted variable bias. So we can make the two statements, right? Statement A is people who seek Jungian psychoanalysis, people who analyze their dreams, people who get in touch with their unconscious, see positive real world outcomes in relation to being in a better place in life. Okay, that might be a true statement. If you just look at variable X, people who go to Jung, variable Y, better outcomes in life. The question is now, okay, what constitutes X? And the next step would be to say, people who talk to a friend once a week about their problems.
Yeah.
It could also be X, and Y could be, again, see a better outcome in their real life, right? So there is no attempt in this book at all. I don't know about his broader research, but there's no attempt in this book at all to address that and be like, there just seems to be this very like sure thing of like, this actually works. People are having better outcomes and so on, but there's no attempt to try and figure out whether the positive outcomes are actually due to the very specific Jungian elements of what you're doing, or whether it's simply an effect of trying to figure out your shit.
Yeah. For sure.
And again, the same applies to religion and other things like that, I think.
Yeah.
Yes, maybe your religion is... Maybe people who belong to your religion have better outcomes in life than the average person, and maybe that means that there's something true about your religion. Or maybe it means people who join a local community live better than people who don't join a local community. Maybe that accounts for 100% in the outcome of why.
This reminds me,
which is more likely
to drag this conversation down into the cesspit where it belongs. It reminds me of like the whole nofap thing, which is I'm sure basically everyone is aware of, like, you know, like where people like consciously make a decision to like stop masturbating with all these like it's a meme at this point, because, you know, people talk about like you're able to levitate and shit, which is just brilliant. But, you know,
where's this going?
There are all of these anecdotes about people who they quit watching porn, for example, and suddenly their lives improve so much. They start like getting fit, they start eating healthier, they start making friends and stuff. And this is like considered evidence for the fact that like masturbation is like necessarily the problem. Mm-hmm. Whereas in reality, what's far more likely is that, you know, exercising some kind of an ounce of discipline in your life can be the catalyst to improve your life in other ways. Mm-hmm. And that it's not this one specific thing which is destroying your life necessarily, but it's rather this like broader question of self-discipline. Mm-hmm.
And you could even be more specific within that. You like, again, if X is not masturbating, 100% of the effect of that could actually just come from not watching porn. Even that would be a more even conservative interpretation, but to make a weaker claim, right? So it's like people who watch porn masturbate to it. Yeah. But the problem is not that they masturbate and that has some kind of psychological effect. It's that, you know, watching porn and desensitizing themselves to, sexual pleasures isn't beneficial. So if you could still, like, I guess, I don't know, think about your girlfriend or whatever and masturbate, or sure, or like simply look at porn pictures instead of watching videos, and maybe that would also have a positive effect.
Sure, but the positive effect would be in a specific area, like it would be to do with your sensitivity to like to sexual things, right? But it wouldn't necessarily mean that you go out and get a job.
No, exactly. But yeah, simply to illustrate, like there are so many layers to this omitted variable bias.
Yeah.
That like to simply do this like X therefore Y is like it. Whenever you make such a claim, you have to really be sure that it's actually about the specific thing that you're doing and not a symptom of something different, right?
Yeah, especially when you're trying to advocate for that.
Exactly, and I think that's a very big problem with this book and with these kind of ideologies.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, I'm done. I'm done with shitting on this book, and I'm ready to talk about something I liked. Good. I don't know if you.
Yeah. I'm keen. You wanted to talk about the anima and animus.
Yes, and I have two specific. So one is page 191.
Can you give me the first line?
So this is... Okay, could you just read the paragraph, I guess, from By Nursing Secret?
By nursing... By nursing secret destructive attitudes, a wife can drive her husband and a mother her children into illness, accident, or even death. Or she may decide to keep the children from marrying, a deeply hidden form of evil that rarely comes to the surface of a mother's conscious mind. Brackets, a naive old woman once said to me while showing me a picture of her son who was drowned when he was 27, quote, "I prefer it this way. It's better than giving away to another woman."
Okay, to give some pretext to this, before this section, he talked about the animus, which is the kind of male, what would you say, the male self, the male, if you're a woman, you have something that's called the animus, which is like a archetypal male element, masculine element within you. Masculine is the word, right? And if you're a man, then you would have something called the anima, that is a feminine archetypal element within you. And for example, if you're a man and your anima and you're not in touch with your anima, then that would mean that you have bad relationships with women because you don't understand the nature of women, right?
Right.
So, okay, reading this specific part, this is a different archetype of sometimes called the devouring mother. So this kind of overprotectiveness or not wanting your children to get out into the world.
Yeah.
Other like, helicopter moms, all that. Like
helicopter
just
mom.
stay in my basement forever. So like, you know, even if I don't achieve anything in my life, I can always say that I had a child with special needs and I had to take care of them, whatever, right? Which is, I think, and I think it's like, if you're a mother in 2024 and you have 3 children and one of them is trans and one of them is non-binary and one of them identifies as a fox, the chances, statistically speaking, the chances that the children actually were born this way are 1 to 10 million. The chances that you are a devouring mother type who is pressing the shit on your children is 100%. Like, if you have 3 children and they're all trans, I'm sorry that you did that. Anyway, what I was gonna get to is, I thought it was very interesting that Jung deduces says that this devouring mother archetype is actually a malfunction of the animus, of the male spirit. Whereas I always thought that that it would be a problem with the anima, right? Because it's this like overprotective mother, right? So I always said, so that means there's something wrong with the female spirit in our culture, maybe. But no, it's actually probably the opposite. It's something wrong with the animus, the male spirit, in women who would exhibit this kind of behavior.
So just to clarify for people listening, the animus is something that is that Jung claims is embodied in women. There is no anima in women.
Yes,
right?
Yes.
There can only be one. Yeah, sorry, carry on. I just wanted to make that point.
Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and I mean, I would say in probably a couple of ways, without like getting again like into specific politics and whatever. I think it would be fair to say that a lot of problems we have in current society are a function of the devouring mother archetype, or a kind of overprotective feminine spirit. So one of that could be like this whole like just children being overprotective, children not leaving the house, and then you have all these guys who end up as like the stereotype of the 40-year-old virgin in mom's basement who is like watching anime or whatever.
Yeah.
Like in Japan, hikikomori, like
sure.
as a social problem, right? And I always thought, without really thinking much about this to begin with, I always thought that, okay, so that means that in our culture or in these men, there's something wrong with the female spirit. There's something wrong with the anima. Jung's analysis would probably be the opposite. It would be to say that there's something wrong with the animus in the mothers of our society that raise these kind of men. And I think that's an interesting thing to think about.
I find it, yeah, I find the idea of, it feels quite typical in Jung of these like unexpected flips. Especially, I think, like I mentioned earlier, when he was speaking about a dream of a man who saw it was like he saw this like old hag in his dream, and he thought that this was a representation of like not a real woman, but of a woman, and but it was actually like a reflection of his self, and this kind of like incomplete connection with his anima. How, when you say that you think it's what would the integration of the animus in a mother or like a devouring mother look like?
Well, if I understood Jung's point correctly, to give his more like story-driven example, is this, was it French or Dutch or something? There's this story of Bluebeard, who is like this male character who appears in a lot of ancient stories. Like there's an example of like this. I have a very good picture I'm looking at right now. Obviously, no one can see this. There's this creepy guy handing like a young woman a key.
Yeah, it's an old folktale.
Yeah, it's folktale, and it's like Bluebeard tells her that whatever she does, she shouldn't go into this room, and of course, eventually she goes into the room and she discovers all the dead bodies of Bluebeard's previous wives, and then as a result of her entering this room, she then gets found out. Bluebeard found out that she knows about the murder, so then he kills her as well. So I guess in this case, the animus is this masculine spirit that he associates with what? Aggressiveness, in a way, rationality, as opposed to instinct. And that it somehow what is the claim that he actually makes? I'm not quite sure. Is it something like, if women don't correctly understand this male spirit called animus, then their relationships with men are going, nowadays we would say toxic, are going to be of a nature where they're maybe overly scared.
Right.
So that this tenant, like...
Well, it says here, psychologically, Bluebeard represents a particular form of the animus that lures women away from all human relationships, and especially from all contacts with men. Right.
Okay. I found my train of thought. So nowadays you could make an example of a girl who had a bad relationship with her father, so therefore she becomes extremely mistrustful of men in general, and like maybe even the idea of marriage or sex is very terrifying to her, more so than it's on average healthy, I guess.
Yeah.
And so then that leads her to take a certain path in life where she avoids all these things that actually put her in a situation where she is more likely to suffer from like male aggression or something, or maybe that puts her on a path where she avoids sex and romantic relationships until she's like 35, and then she's like, oh god, menopause, whatever, maybe I should think about children. She goes on some dating site and just, she doesn't know anything about dating, she doesn't know anything about men, so she gets abused by a bunch of creeps. That would be the Bluebeard story, right? So this not understanding the animus puts you on a path in which you're more likely to act in a way to actually suffer the damage or the negative aspects of masculinity.
Right.
Whereas if you understood and confronted masculinity, you would probably be able to have a healthy relationship with masculinity and with men in real life.
Yeah.
Right. So to come back to hikikomori, or I guess like the male 35-year-old, like I think it is probably still true that they have in a similar way a negative relationship with their anima. But yeah, this like the overprotective mother that raises these children could also be a function of someone who is
a part of the equation.
Misunderstanding. Yeah, who is not understanding the animus, right?
Now that you mention an anima with male hikikomori, there is kind of the kind of cliche of being like obsessed with idol culture, and idols who are typically female. There is that. You do see that in Japan a lot. That kind of there is the.
Perfect segue into my next point. Go.
There is some ideal represented in, maybe not an ideal, but there is some kind of like fascination with the character of the opposite gender who has embodied certain qualities that are opposite to your own, and I can't. It is interesting how in Japan there is quite a big difference between the way that men idols and women idols are. How it does seem to be that kind of like the girl idols in Japan who cater towards men are very like, there's this like they're very cute and they have this kind of nurturing thing, whilst there's not. I've had a lot of conversations with people about this, and I think my kind of initial assumption was there was like some like sexual component to it, but and I don't know like much about this at all, but like I was told that, and I've been made to think that like there are parts that are kind of beyond that are more about like some kind of nurturing feeling that you get from connecting to someone in that way. And on the flip
and now
side,
we've actually
on the flip side, for women who idolize male idols, I remember this came up in one of our classes. There was this kind of idea that from a woman's perspective, there is something very empowering about seeing a male idol. And there is an identification with like this sort of like masculine power, which attracts people. And in the case of like Jung, I think that's very much like what he would argue, like. And from the perspective of anima and animus, you can see how that kind of they can be the psychological reflection of you. And your desires, maybe you're either, if from a man's perspective, a desire for some kind of for love and affection, and those sort of more like, as he might say, like irrational, emotional experiences, and then from a girl's perspective, it would be this like empowering thing.
Right. So to jump right into that, on the male part. Like if you looked at like these like dudes in their 40s, living still at home, never had a girlfriend, like the Jungian analysis, or like maybe even the Freudian analysis, would be to say that they probably had overprotective mothers who they were pampered as children. They never really learned independence, assertiveness. As a result, they were probably not very popular at school. Chances are they were the fat kid at school, and they're probably still maybe overweight and don't care about their appearance. That led them onto a path where they had very low self-worth. They were not assertive with women. They didn't have a girlfriend. And now, as a result of this lack of understanding the female spirit, of never having contended in real life with the female spirit, they have now this infantile fantasy of what a woman is, of this like cutesy idol who loves everyone, and
like a little sister kind of thing or something.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter if you're like, it doesn't matter if you're not assertive, or if you don't exhibit any of the characteristics that usually women look for in men. That it's just this like loving spirit, almost like a mother as well, who takes care of you. And that is, that would be I think like a Jungian malfunction of the anima. And this is kind of relevant in Japan, and maybe somewhere in the West as well in more recent years. I wanted to specifically talk about the female side, and this is in a footnote of like a picture description on page 194. And so there's one picture of like an Indian, Indian, like an Indian picture where a woman is looking at a picture of a dude. And below that is a picture of like a modern hot actor. And the description reads, above right, an Indian miniature of a girl gazing with love at a man's portrait. A woman falling in love with a picture or a film star is clearly projecting her animus onto the man. The actor Rudolph Valentino, right, in a film made in 1922, became the focus of animus projection for thousands of women while he lived, and even after he died. Then something else. Okay. Yes, there is this kind of idol culture in Japan, and there's a lot of like dudes who have like an anime character that they like, whatever. I think this thing is so much more common nowadays with women, actually, with the young women. And we had this in our program in university. Well, I think some of our kohai, and even now I'm in like a line group with my student dorm and with people at my uni. And the male, even if I just look at people's social media profiles, right? The dudes are usually like picture of themselves with like, or their Instagram is like sports, it's them camping, outdoorsy.
Right.
Some people might have like an anime picture, but that's kind of the extent of it. So percentage-wise, so many of the women, and this is this whole thing I hate this word so much, oshi,
right?
Which I think this is the K-pop kind of similar thing of like you stan someone or whatever that is. Like so many Japanese women are like obsessed with like a like male anime character, and their whole page, their whole profile is about like this little stuffed doll. I think it has a name, but there's these ugly dolls.
Yeah.
Like it's not pop figure. What is it? It's like a plushie.
I don't know the name, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's like this little miniature ugly plushie, and their whole identity is just about that. Like my oshi every day, 100%. Like they're always posting. Like if you look at their posts, they're all about like going at events, and like in Japan, every now and then you have like shopping malls where it's like, oh, this anime themed like exhibition, and it's just a bunch of like printed up pictures of this like anime character, and it's like people going there like religiously pilgering there, and it's like exactly the thing that Jung described in this thing. It's like it's clear, it's so, and these girls, most of them probably never really talk to boys, none of them usually have boyfriends, and it just seems so very obvious that this is now becoming the female version of the male version of this like
Right,
idol
right,
obsessed
right.
guy, where they're like so clearly not understanding the animus and are objectively projecting an infantile characterization of the animus on this literally stuffed like doll, physical doll.
Yeah. For sure.
And it's so prevalent these days. It came out of nowhere.
Yeah, it is. I think that's also it's interesting as well because the discussion of like hikikomori, there is always like, you know, I think there's a conversation now as well, like in like Europe and I guess like in the West of like, I mean, even the kind of whole incel thing is, we could say that's probably parallel to hikikomori in some ways. But like a lot of these like discussions about social isolation and stuff like that, they tend to kind of focus around men. But there is very, very rare discussion of like how it affects women. And yeah, I agree. I think there is like I think it's a little bit less talked about, but it's definitely very relevant. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. It would be interesting. Like, you know, we graduated we graduated a bachelor's in modern Japanese studies, which is a complete bullshit program. But here's an thing to actually analyze. Like, what is up with this? Like, it always used to be from probably like the 90s, I would say, to like definitely 2010s was a huge thing. This whole like male
Otaku.
hikikomori otaku thing, like idol culture, my waifu, blah 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 blah. I think it's flipping all of a sudden from like 2020 or something, and there's all these girls now with this male animus projection. Again, relating especially to this word oshi, and it's like, what the fuck's going on? Like, and it's definitely an Asian thing. Like, I don't think this happening in Europe.
Right. Yeah. Sure.
So I just thought that was interesting. I don't know. I have nothing else to say about that.
Yeah. I think it's also, I mean, generationally as well, like, one thing that maybe this is, I'm probably biased in my perspective here. I'm definitely probably biased in my perspective here, but like, when you consider, you know, people from roughly our generation, maybe a little bit older, like definitely millennial Japanese women, a lot of them, especially if they were middle class, would have grown up probably without like much of a presence of their own fathers in their lives because of you know, how work is distributed in Japan. Like men of that generation especially would be the breadwinners, and the kind of ideal family arrangement would be for the mother to stay at home. And you would kind of anticipate maybe from that there would be far more like visible projection of the animus in the behavior of Japanese women of that generation. But I have always, of all the women that I know and have met from that kind of generation, it always struck me as actually generally very like well-rounded. And again, like I can only really speak about my experience, but when you see women who are a little bit younger, you know, the women who are about like university age, there is definitely a difference, I think. Although there is certainly variance, like it's not like the same across the board, but yeah, it's also maybe the case that like it's when you see someone in their 30, they've already grown through something. But well,
still, I think, for example, it's possible that there's a causality here where first we had a wave of like a lot of dudes tuning out of dating, like I'm just gonna play video games, fuck real relationships, 2D waifu, all that stuff. That has now
Marrying my
triggered into
Nintendo
a
DS
generation.
girlfriend.
that has now triggered a generation of girls who their average experience, or a common experience with men, is just that they're not interested. Like
Sure.
like they've not really had male friends maybe in school, and so now they don't really know what the what the masculine spirit is, and yeah, it's now they're like projecting it now onto this like fictional thing. Could be, I don't know.
Yeah, possibly. I would be really interested to look from this perspective at like single sex schooling as well, and how that kind of influences people.
One more thing about an American parallel, maybe not parallel, but I'm just gonna whatever. Okay, so in the U.S., obviously now there's a big, or we can say North America, maybe generally, there's a big push culturally toward like more without evaluating it. I think it's fair objectively to say that things have gotten a bit more feminist compared to 30 years ago, and the like masculine male, and the idea, the archetype of the patriarch is not viewed favorably in overall culture. I think that's fair to say as well.
Yeah.
But then you look at I definitely know some like very progressive feminist characters. By characters I mean people who
you're talking about your anime waifu.
Exactly. Who are extremely tuned into that feminist sphere, and they're like, yeah, male oppression, blah blah blah. Okay, fine. There might be merit to that. At the same time, especially with that kind of audience, and they like what is it, the Marvel thing with the Wonder Woman and all that, like, yeah, more female heroes and all that. At the same time, within the same audience, for some reason, Iron Man is like super fucking, and like Tony, what's his name? Downey Jr. or Tony Stark.
Tony Stark, right?
Is extremely popular with that same demographic, and it's so funny because that guy is actually like as a character archetype, he's like the most masculine fascist you could imagine. Like he is a complete authoritarian technocrat. He just seeps toxic masculinity. That's flying, like his character.
Yeah. He's like the flying embodiment of the Elon Musk.
he exactly. He's literally the Iron Man. Like how? Like,
I've never come. I don't know any feminists that like Marvel.
And it's. I think it's, in a way, I think, of all the Marvel movies, the Iron Man ones are the most like grossing in income.
Sure. I think he is incredibly popular, I think.
Exactly. Setting aside maybe Avengers, and obviously even in Avengers he has kind of a main role, I think. But it seems like a kind of telling cultural signal that a general misunderstanding of the animus,
okay,
or like a mistrust of masculinity as a whole, has like it consciously has then, however, unconsciously produced this like super popular, super masculine, like over fashion.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think now is probably a good time for us to round off the podcast by talking about our own dreams, and maybe offering each other our kind of individual interpretation of these dreams that we're having. I've got a couple, I think. I actually have a note that I wrote describing a dream that I had 5 years ago. I don't know if I will I'll think about saying this because it's not dark, but it's a bit sad.
Mm.
And
You don't have to say anything too personal.
I was just gonna read it, but anyway, you said you had a couple of dreams, right?
I don't usually remember my dreams, but maybe it's because we've been reading about this. Maybe it's because I'm sleep deprived. I actually remembered 2 of my dreams very vividly this morning. So,
Okay.
I'm gonna start with the first one, which I don't remember that much detail, but the gist is that I'm climbing it's at night, and I'm climbing a kind of mountain facility. Like there's a facility in the mountain. There's like stairs. So there's like this industrial environment in a mountain. I'm climbing it together with my girlfriend. And we come to like a high point with like a little lower wall. And then we see a flashlight behind us. So we hide behind the wall.
Okay.
And then, we're like, okay, are we safe? Are we safe? And then the guard finds us. It's like a guard in uniform. And he's like, yeah. And we're like, oh, hey there. We're just strolling around. And it seems all fine. But, as we're walking down the mountain, somehow a fight breaks out, a very violent fight. And I have to fight the guard. And I don't remember how we get to that point exactly, but I'm in trouble because I don't have any weapons. And so the dream ends, and this is how I wake up. I have to eventually, I'm smashing his head on the concrete for a long time, and it turns to more and more disgusting pulp. And I kill him, but I don't feel like I've won. I feel like very, I don't feel like guilty for killing him, but the whole thing was just so horrible that I don't feel like any relief after winning the fight.
Right. Oh, this is good. Okay. You're climbing a mountain, right? The mountain is it's described by some of Jung's cronies as the cronies is the wrong word. A mountain is it's a point that you view. It's meant to symbolize some kind of enlightenment as being a vantage point. You're climbing it, so you're trying to pursue some kind of spiritual or emotional growth or something. I'll tackle this in a couple different chunks. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about your girlfriend separately. Talk about the industrial thing separately as well. You climbing the mountain and then confronting a guard who you fear, who you want to avoid, and who eventually ends up fighting you. Maybe this is a reflection of the general struggle of achieving some kind of enlightened intellectual stance that you inevitably have to defeat people who are blocking the way.
So the Jungian thing is usually that the whatever character you're fighting with is actually a part of yourself, but I haven't figured out if the guard is that.
I don't know.
If my unconscious was trying to tell me something, what is it? And is it significant that the win doesn't feel like a win?
Yeah. From a objective stance, having to kill someone that you didn't want to fight in the first place is pretty bad. That's just not fun anyway. Maybe you're not a person who shies away from climbing a mountain if it's if this is reflective of some kind of intellectual pursuit or some pursuit of enlightenment. The fact that you're climbing at night, I feel, also has some kind of significance, but I don't really know
Yeah, I feel
It
like
feels
it
like
adds to the
kind of inversion. Like you would
if it
climb
was during the day,
Mm.
then there would be no reason maybe for the guard to catch us. Like
Right,
night
sure.
symbolizes that you're not supposed to be there.
Yeah,
So like
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But at the same time, it's like, do you gain the same benefit from climbing the mountain at night as you would from climbing it in the daytime when you would be able to see from the top? I don't know.
Yeah, we'll keep it in the background. Your turn next.
Okay.
Unless you want to add something.
I was going to say, I mean, the industrial facility, I had something about that, but I've forgotten it. Climbing with your girlfriend, what do you think that means?
I don't know. I mean, the very obvious, like, horoscopy thing would be to say that we're approaching some kind of challenge that we have to master, but I don't think that would be a very Jungian analysis, right? Usually Jung tries to, like, the other people in the dream often are like some part or another of yourself that's repressed, and that.
So if this was like a reflection of your anima, is it significant that are you leading her up, or are you like?
I think so. I don't quite remember, but I guess it adds to the. I wouldn't be as scared of the guard if I was just by myself, I guess. There's something about like yeah, like I don't think I would have had to fight him otherwise. I don't know.
Do you think it's significant that you were trying to hide yourself and your girlfriend from the guard?
Maybe.
This can get very deep very quickly. This is very like brave thing to do, to talk about our dreams on the podcast. Because maybe you could say that seeking to hide like your anima from some other masculine force is like that has some kind of significance. Because the guard could also be you, that kind of like some part of you as well, and maybe defeating him is like a sign. If I was going to go all out and take your money for this thing, I would say that you're on the verge of a spiritual breakthrough, where you've defeated this totalitarian masculine element inside of you and are ready to embrace your femininity.
I'm gonna be a femboy.
Yeah, you'd make a good femboy.
I saw this dream where I fought a guard and I won, but I didn't feel so good about it. The therapist's like, we should put you on hormones.
Okay. I've had dreams recently, but they haven't been vivid and I haven't remembered them. But yeah, I'll read this dream to you. Where does it start? So I visit an unreal childhood haunt. Haunt is like a place that you used to visit. And I am a child in the dream, and this is how it goes. I'm in some food court, like a McDonald's or something, walking past my cousins and auntie and uncle, who were talking about family values. For some reason I have in quotes, to me, to you. Found the table by the far wall, my mum and dad sitting there. Dad was sat back against the wall on a long booth chair, and I moved through mum to hug him. In this dream, I was a child, maybe 6 years old. He was big, wearing my green t-shirt or something similar. The hug was warm and embracing. And then the scene faded and I woke up.
Walk up, like walk
Woke up.
upstairs?
No, woke up.
Woke up.
I
Okay,
awoke
sorry.
from my dream.
Yeah. So, and you saw this 5 years ago before entering uni?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, it doesn't seem like a bad dream.
No. So I wrote that I woke up crying as well. It was very like emotionally charged dream, for sure.
Is this a point in your life where you're actively thinking about like going to uni and like taking the step to go to Japan?
This is like, I think this is probably the summer before I left.
I mean, it seems like, I mean, I don't know. It seems like closure, something like that. Like you're moving on to like a next step. Like, I mean, obviously you're leaving your home country, so that's like, you know, your family. I think it's significant that it's not just your parents, but also your cousins and so on were in the dream.
Yeah.
So it feels like a like saying like goodbye, I'm off. I'm gonna do my thing. Like,
do you think that would be the Jungian like? So
what would Okay, let's focus on, because Jung likes to do this. Let's focus on specific objects. Like one thing he says, as opposed to Freud, is that there is always a reason why there is a specific object in your dream that's not represented in a different way. Why was it like? Why is a key specific? Like, why is it not a carrot?
Right. So I'm in a food court like a McDonald's.
You were working? Were you not working in food before that?
I wasn't working at McDonald's, but yeah.
I know. Well, I know that, but you're working in food, right?
Yes.
Food
Yeah.
industry.
Sure.
Okay. So you're also leaving that environment.
My dad is wearing a big green T-shirt. He's wearing my green T-shirt.
Does it look big on your dad? Do you remember that?
Oh no, it says he was big wearing my green T-shirt or something similar.
Okay.
He was big, and I'm 6 years old, or I'm like a child.
Right. You're a child. Green. Why the fuck is it green?
I think it might be a T-shirt that I actually owned. That was my dad's. That I used to wear. So I think it might be. I mean, it might be referenced. Well, that's context at least.
Yeah, I mean, the T-shirt could be like an object that you projected your, I guess, affection to your family onto, to your dad onto, and if you're hugging and then you wake up and you go into Japan and all that, it's maybe it does feel kind of like, you know, you're leaving this object and this environment behind. But you're not being torn away, right?
No.
So
I mean, it seems that the dream ends whilst I'm hugging him.
Right. It just feels like closure. I don't know. It seems like a good dream to have before going on the journey.
Dream, yeah. I have one more dream.
Me too.
Do you want to go first?
Let's do a trade-off. Okay, let's do one more round of dream analysis. Okay, so this was the second dream I saw last night.
Yeah.
I'm in the car. I think it's summer. I'm in the car with my dad. My dad's driving. But I'm not a child. I'm just my regular self, I think.
Yeah.
And we're pulling into a parking lot. And as we're pulling into the parking lot, a car approaches from nowhere at high speed and crashes, like, passes by us and crashes into the wall in the parking lot. As we're trying to get out the car and call an ambulance, another car comes. Second car looks like a Indian tuk-tuk.
Right.
And it has a bunch of water bottles strapped to the back. Like a lot of them.
Like normal size water bottles.
Yes, like 100 or so. They're full, yeah.
Okay.
And it also crashes into the wall next to it, and so both cars are burning. Me and my dad get out of the car, call the ambulance at the same time. My dad connects first, and then mine connects later, and then I get yelled at by the 911 person for like reporting the same thing. And so I'm angry about that. I'm like, this is not my fucking fault. Okay. And then we're watching the first car, and a family emerges. It's 3 people, and there's one dad and at least one child. The second one might be mom or a daughter. I don't know.
Yeah.
And they leave the car, and then the car explodes. They just made it out.
Okay.
The second car, this is the tuk-tuk with the water bottles.
Yeah.
Family emerges. A dad, a small son, and a small daughter. They seem to have made it out. They're walking very slowly, and everyone's like, walk faster, it's gonna explode, walk faster. They just make it enough away. The car explodes. And then as they approach near us, we realize that, first of all, they all have Down syndrome. And second of all,
okay,
their arms were all blown off during the accident, so they have no arms.
Oh shit! Right.
And they just drop dead in front of us immediately.
Wow.
And that's how the dream ends.
Oh, wow! This is okay. There's a lot going on here.
Yeah. So the Jungian thing I thought was like very specific thing about the arms.
Right.
But I can't tell, yeah.
It's also maybe significant that you all are in the same, you all arrive at the same destination. There's like 2 families of the same number, definitely a dad and children. And they come out in succession, and they have different, but they come out in different ways, and the outcome is different. Water bottles.
I remember at one point before they are leaving the car, I remember like, oh, maybe the bottles will put out the fire.
Yeah, right.
And there's a very specific image of like the 3, like dad in the middle, son and daughter to the left and right, and they all have their arms torn off perfectly. And they have like a typical Down syndrome face. I don't know what that means anything, but yeah.
Well, maybe there's something. It seems like the other car is pretty like normal by comparison.
Exactly.
A normal car, normal seeming family, but then it's a tuk-tuk.
They make it out.
And they make it out, yeah. But it's a tuk-tuk with water bottles strapped to it, and the drivers all have Down syndrome.
It feels like a comparison, right? First, the normal example, and then the second one is like exceptional in various ways. Yeah.
But you're an observer in all of this as well. And they both still crash. So they both still...
Yes.
That's very weird.
But the first family makes it out alive.
Yeah. And they don't... The other family don't die in the crash. They get out first and then die.
Yeah.
That's... I don't know how to begin with
almost... that. Did you watch Breaking Bad?
I watched most of it.
It almost felt like that one scene where Gus Fring gets blown up. Do you know that scene?
I haven't seen it in years, so I don't remember any of the characters or any of the story.
Well, there's one scene where this guy, he gets assassinated, and then he walks out to the room, he looks fine. Then we see his side profile, and like all his side is torn off.
Right.
And he drops dead.
Okay.
That's how the ending felt, like with the arms missing. Yeah.
I have no idea.
so
we should
fucking
definitely
weird.
ask ChatGPT these questions sometimes.
Yeah,
I
I
did
did
try it with
actually.
one of my dreams. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did it give
It's
you
just,
any interesting insights?
no.
Yeah. Okay, I'll give you my last
Yeah,
dream.
yeah.
This is a recurring dream I used to have as a child. I probably had it like maybe like 4 times or something, maybe a bit more. I don't know. There, just as context, there's this TV show I used to watch when I was younger called Stargate SG-1, and it's like very bad. It's like it's great, but it's also very like kind of trashy, like science fiction TV show. One of the female protagonists from that TV show is in a dark library, and it's like there's very little light anywhere. All the corridors are completely dark. It kind of looks more like a Costco kind of like metal shelf kind of thing, maybe not like a traditional library in a traditional sense, maybe. She's being pursued by the alien from Alien. You know the alien.
Yeah.
And she is trying to like escape. Although it's not really clear that there's any like actual exit or anywhere to go. It's just kind of like a very short sequence where she's trying to escape or trying to just run away from this predator. And she eventually, when I think it maybe like changed sometimes the dream, or maybe it was just I had this knowledge and I never actually witnessed it, but I knew that if she got caught, the alien would make her ears pop, like when you get in a plane, your ears decompress. That would be like the outcome to being caught by this alien. But there's still like a sense of mortal terror.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, wait, what is your position in this again?
I'm just like a ethereal observer. Like I don't have any body. I'm just witnessing it.
Yeah, I have a lot of dreams like that as well. Yeah. Okay. Alien. I mean, the girl does seem like kind of a projection of yourself, perhaps. Like if there is a sense of mortal terror, like
yes,
you would probably feel more disinterested if you didn't identify with that child in some way, right?
Yeah.
Alien. What does the alien represent?
I don't think I definitely hadn't seen the movie Alien when I was that young. I feel like maybe that's also significant as well. Like it's a fear that I hadn't confronted, maybe.
Well, it could be something about
understand the form of.
It could be something about growing up. Like the alien is, first of all, it's big. And it's, if you haven't seen the movie, it's like a thing that's reserved for adults, right? You're not supposed to watch that. That's a movie for adults. So it's like, what happens when you become an adult? Do you become an alien like that? Like, I guess, that little girl.
Yeah.
It's strange that she's a girl.
It's a woman. It's an adult woman.
Oh, sorry, it's a woman.
So
Never mind then.
And in the show, she's like a soldier, so she's wearing army fatigues and stuff.
Ah, okay. I had this wrong. Never mind.
Maybe. I mean, she's also not in the show, like, as far as I remember, not like a strong character, like not necessarily like typically vulnerable. And then, like, having your ears pop is like such a weird.
Right.
It's a very simple dream, but like it's this very weird. Yeah.
Well, the having your ears popped could just simply be like an uncomfortable thing that you have. Like as a child, you don't know what it's like to die, or like you don't know what it's like to break a leg, probably.
Possibly. Yeah.
Or like what like real pain is like. I don't know, like real terror or like just mortal fear you experience as an adult. So like,
but
having your ears popped could be like something that's just like your idea of something that's bad.
Possibly, yeah. I would still think, you know, it would make more sense to how. It doesn't have to make perfect sense. I guess this is the nature of dreams, but there are things that are scary that could be the outcome of that. So why does something so banal seem so scary?
I think it's a common thing in dreams, isn't it? Yeah.
And it is kind of the sense where you are a child, like, you know, when you're getting chased as a child, and there's kind of a fun and a fear in that, like being chased by like a parent or a like a adult figure that's bigger than you, and having that kind of like thrill,
playing catch. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there maybe is like an element of that in there too. Maybe it's actually like a playful dream. It might actually be like a representation of play.
What happens when you get your ears like getting them popped, so they're becoming free, right? No, they're not being stuffed.
It's not
like
sorry, go on.
In order for your ears to get popped, they had to be like compressed or whatever before, right?
Yeah. I'm not sure whether it's the case. I don't think they were like compressed to begin with. But maybe that's not actually important. It's not like there was a clear sense of like relief in it. And I don't think it ever necessarily actually even happened in the dream. It was just something I knew would happen. But still, yeah, the idea of it being like a freeing thing is totally plausible.
Okay, I was thinking like it might be a Jungian thing to say that, like, what does it mean to like have your sense of hearing impaired or something like that? Like, you can't pay attention to your surroundings or something like that.
In a dark library as well, that would be important. Be able to hear.
I don't know.
And it was a library, but it didn't. I don't remember there being any books anywhere. I just knew it was a library, and that was something. I mean, we can wrap it up, but the one thing I thought was kind of interesting with Jung was like, if you know something is true in a dream, if you know that this is something, or if there's a voice that tells you something and it doesn't belong to any character, that's like a direct call from your unconscious to like. It's kind of an interesting thought.
I mean, a library, again, is a place where you're supposed to be quiet, a silent place, right? So having your ears popped could be related to that. Yeah,
that's true. Especially if there are no books, there's no kind of... You can't really derive any interpretation from that.
How old were you when you saw this dream?
I was definitely like younger than 10.
Could it have been that you were in an environment where people told you to be quiet, like at school where you were a rowdy kid or something?
No. I mean, I had the dream over the course of like a couple of years, I remember. Like I would occasionally have it. I don't know. I don't think that was like. I was never a rowdy kid, and I don't think I was ever like, told much to be quiet.
I don't know. Write to us at, what's our email?
That's bookboys, bookboyspod@gmail.com.
Write your interpretations of our dreams.
We'll send you 100 yen in whatever currency you desire per interpretation.
If you're still listening at 2 hours 30.
All right. Next time, we haven't fully locked it in, but we are probably going to be doing... what is the book? Richard Wolff.
So Richard Wolff, like a famous Marxist professor who by modern leftists is often held up as like a a reasonable communist alternative. And his book is called Democracy at Work, A Cure for Capitalism.
Yes.
So, yes, we're going to basically examine what is often... It has very high ratings on Amazon. Although
So
few
does this
people who
book.
rated it. Haha. But...
So this book does as well.
I mean, yeah, people are going to read the books that they like anyway, right? But...
Not us.
That's why we're doing this. Not us, not us. So... We thought we did Ayn Rand, we did Hayek, so we should look at the like more left extremes and what are people on the modern left actually saying is like quote unquote the good communism, right?
Mm. Cool.
So yeah, stay tuned for that.
Yeah. Peace out, everyone. One love.
One love. What?
I don't know. All right, bye.
Bye.
Boys.